war no longer looks you in the eyes. It falls from the sky and comes from far away. And the most terrifying part is that most deaths today do not happen in a duel. Not from a bullet fired by a specific person, but from artillery. Impersonal, deaf, killing you before you even realize you have become a target. "I didn't even see who was firing," a soldier said, sitting in a crater where people had stood just minutes before. There was no fight, no charge, order, only a sound so loud it tore the air apart along with bodies. And now, I don't know who to hate because I never saw the enemy. In modern wars, bullets have faded into the background because the real work is done by artillery, rockets, mortars. Up to 70, and sometimes 80%, of casualties are caused not by small arms, but by shelling that blankets areas rather than targets. That is why survival has become a matter of chance, not skill. "We can be perfectly trained," an officer said with tension in his voice. "We can hold positions, make no mistakes, but if artillery lands on us, none of that matters. You don't win here in a firefight. You just survive, or you don't." A shell doesn't ask whether you're a soldier, a medic, or just someone standing nearby. It doesn't care if you're experienced or new. That is its greatest cruelty. War turns into mathematics of areas and timing, where people are just variables that can be replaced. "I'm not afraid of a bullet," someone whispered in the shelter. "You can hear a bullet, you can hide from it. But this you just wait for. Every second feels like the last because when it arrives, the decision has already been made without you." The ground shakes, the air tears apart, and people learn to distinguish types of explosions the way they once distinguished voices. Artillery has become the language of modern war, the language of domination, intimidation, and destruction. This is where the story begins. When most losses are caused not by bullets, but by shelling, war stops being a confrontation between people and becomes a test of survival under a rain of metal, where courage, experience, and will matter less than coordinates, timing, and someone's cold calculation far from the front. With each passing day, they stopped living between battles and started living between bombardments. Gunfire had logic, response, direction, a chance to maneuver. Artillery stripped even that away, leaving only waiting, where every minute stretched longer than an hour, and every sound felt like a prelude to the end. "Do you feel it?" a soldier said, pressing himself against the shelter wall where concrete had already cracked. "This isn't fear, it's worse. Fear has an object. Here, you're not afraid of the enemy, you're afraid of the ground itself, which can explode beneath you at any second." Shelling came in waves, without warning and without meaning to those below. A shell doesn't care whether you just ate, wrote home, or allowed yourself to believe for a moment that today might be quiet. That indifference is what made artillery the main weapon of war. It shattered nerves faster than bodies. "We're positioned correctly," an officer said, staring at a watch that no longer measured time but tension. "But correct means nothing here. If we're hit, no one will ask whether we followed the rules." People stopped counting days and started counting pauses between explosions. Every longer silence felt suspicious, because experience taught them that the worst often came right after. An exhausted brain began to draw catastrophe before it even happened. "The scariest part," someone said in a hollow voice, "is that you can't do anything. You can't shoot back, you can't run, you can't negotiate. You just lie there and wait while someone far away decides whether you live today." Medics stopped asking what happened. The answer was always the same. Shelling. The wounds all looked alike. Torn, anonymous, without a battle story. There was no heroism here, only a fragment that ended up where it shouldn't have. They say a bullet is personal, a soldier whispered, looking at bloodied stretchers. But this is mass, and maybe that's why it kills more. Here, you're not an enemy, you're a statistic. In this second act, it becomes clear that artillery dominates not only physically, but psychologically. It teaches the worst lesson of modern war. Your survival depends not on what you do, but on whether you fall into someone's calculation. And that realization corrodes you from the inside, slower but more reliably than any bullet. The breaking point comes when explosions no longer trigger instant panic, but silence. A mind exhausted by constant anticipation switches into survival mode, where emotions shrink into a narrow corridor between still alive and not anymore. It is in this silence that artillery finally breaks people. "I don't drop anymore," a soldier said, sitting in the shelter with empty eyes. "I just wait. Falling every time costs energy. Waiting feels like accepting that the decision isn't yours anymore." Shelling becomes background noise, like wind or rain, but a poisoned background because any sound can be the last. People lose their sense of time. Hours between salvos merge into one endless tension where even sleep brings no rest. "I fall asleep seeing flashes," someone said with a bitter smile. "I wake up from silence and think it's worse than the noise, because silence means they're reloading." At this point, small arms start to seem almost honest. There's direction, an enemy, a chance to respond. Artillery removes the very idea of a duel, turning war into a grid-based game where a human is not a player, but a square on a map. "You realize we're unnecessary here," an officer said quietly, as if afraid words might draw another barrage. "Everything is decided by coordinates. We're just waiting to see if our time aligns with their calculation." The wounded arrive in waves, just like the shelling. Each wave leaves more empty spaces than filled stretchers. Fragments don't choose, they take several at once. This mass nature of death changes how losses are perceived. "We stopped counting names," a medic admitted, wiping hands that never got clean. "We count minutes between strikes. They decide how many the next wave will bring." In this third act, it becomes undeniable why up to 80% of casualties in modern wars are caused by shelling. Artillery kills not only bodies, it kills the sense of control. And when a person stops believing their actions matter, they begin to disappear even before the fragment finds its target. After weeks under bombardment, people begin to fear not the loud, but the quiet. Silence becomes the preface to catastrophe, and every pause presses harder than an explosion, because in that pause the mind imagines every possible death at once. "Don't be happy," one soldier told another when it suddenly grew too calm overhead. "If they're silent, they're counting. And when they count, one of us is already in the numbers." Commanders talked about maneuvers and cover, but everyone knew these were just words for order's sake. Against artillery, there are no brave decisions, only the depth of a hole and chance. That truth slowly ate away discipline, not through mutiny, but through inner collapse. "I gave the order," an officer admitted with a shadow of shame. "But I don't believe it will change anything. When it hits, it doesn't matter where you stand or what you do. That's the hardest thing to accept when you were trained to be responsible for others." People instinctively began searching for their spot. A corner, a wall fragment, a shallow pit that felt slightly safer. That small belief became the last thing the psyche clung to. Without it, survival felt like a lottery without rules. "I don't pray for victory," someone said in the darkness of the shelter. "I pray that if it comes, it won't be on us. I'm ashamed of that, but I don't know how to wish for anything else anymore." Artillery erased the line between front and rear, between soldier and medic. between the living and those who simply hadn't yet learned they were doomed. That erasure was the deepest violence. War took not only lives, but the illusion that anyone was in control. "We've become shadows," a medic said, looking at a shelter full of people sitting in silence together. "We're not waiting for orders, we're waiting for a signal from the sky, and if it's wrong, no one can correct the mistake." In this phase of war, it becomes clear that artillery wins not because it is precise, but because it is merciless. It teaches people to live in constant readiness for death, without the ability to influence, escape, or even understand why today someone survived and someone vanished in a faceless explosion. When the shelling finally dies down, no one believes it is the end. Silence after artillery sounds like deception. People sit motionless, listening to their own breathing as if it could give away their position. Only later comes the realization that this time they survived not because of decisions or skills, but because somewhere, someone missed. "We're alive," a soldier said quietly without joy. "But I don't know what that means anymore. If we weren't hit today, it doesn't make us stronger. It just postpones the moment when the numbers line up against us again." After artillery, there are no duels and no stories of valor, only craters, fragments, and empty places where voices were just yesterday. Those voids weigh more than any medals, because they remind you that in modern war you can do everything right and still disappear without explanation. "A bullet has an author," a medic said with bitter clarity. "Here, there is no author, only a trajectory. And when 70 or 80% of casualties happen this way, war stops being a clash and becomes a mechanism that grinds down those caught inside the calculation zone." People leave shelters slowly, as if afraid to break a fragile agreement with silence. Every step feels like a challenge to fate. After long weeks under shelling, even light seems suspicious, and the sky feels too open. "I don't think about victory anymore," someone admitted, staring at the horizon. "I think about the next explosion not matching my name. And that's probably the main defeat. War taught me to dream small." The ending of this story is not in the silence itself, and not in an order to withdraw, but in a sober, brutal understanding. When artillery becomes the main killer, war loses its human face completely. Those who survive live knowing they were saved not by skill or courage, but by a few meters and a few seconds. This is the most terrifying result of modern wars. When most deaths are caused not by bullets but by shelling, a person stops being an opponent and becomes a coordinate. Life and death are decided not in combat, but in a calculation that sees no faces, hears no voices, and does not feel that behind every point on the map, someone was alive just a minute ago.